thank you. Can you see my slide correctly? Yes. Just a second. Okay. So I have titled this presentation, sorry, Data for the Digital Historian, the Sloane Lab Experience. I'm Daniele Metilli, my pronouns are they, them. This is a presentation slide. I hold a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and a master's degree in digital humanities. Then I did my PhD in computer science. So my background is not in history. This is a limitation, of course. So if I say something wrong, please correct me. But in this presentation, I wanted to discuss what is also my perspective on the use of data for digital humanities and digital history in particular. So, as Julian said, currently I am a research fellow at University College London, postdoctoral research fellow, and I am working on two projects. One of the projects is, the main one is the Sloane Lab, where I'm handling mostly the data architecture of the project, and then I am also working on as a principal investigator on a different project related to gender diversity in the Wikidata knowledge base. So I have divided the presentation into parts. I didn't put an outline here because it is just 2 parts. It is not a very complex structure. Starting from data, how do we define data? How do we see data in my field, which is computer science and digital humanities, but also in different fields and different ways to look at data. So if we look at the dictionary definition, just simply, we see that the data is defined as facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis. It is sometimes defined as information, especially facts or numbers collected to be examined and considered and used to help decision making or information in an electronic form that can be stored and used by a computer. Another definition here is information in digital form that can be transmitted or processed. So there are many different aspects to the concept of data, and sorry, my slides. Okay. And there are many terms that are associated with data. So both in these definitions, but also if you look elsewhere for additional definitions of data, you will find that data is sometimes seen as computable, digital, it is useful, it is stored somewhere, it is collected together, it is machine readable, electronic, structured or unstructured, big data. So again, a plurality of perspective on data and different ways to look at it. In computer science and in data science, which is a relatively more recent field of study, data science proper was started around not more than 20 years ago. So in this field, which is where I come from, we see very much data as everything that is digital. So everything that is digital, that is digitized, that is available online, etc., can be viewed as data. So we use this very extensive concept of data, which can include not just the structured data, such as a database, but also text and images and video, which is probably different from the way other people look at data. And it is perhaps not the best way to look at it, depending on the context. But we can see that there has been in recent times, especially since the 2000s, an explosive growth in the amount of data that is produced, that is copied, and that is consumed, transformed worldwide, and especially on the web. This is a chart that shows that there's an exponential growth, and this is petabytes of data, which is a one with a lot of zeros. It is a staggering amount of data, not very easy to imagine even. So in recent times and recent decades, we can also see the emergence of some buzzwords. This is taken from the Google Books Anagram Viewer, which allows you to explore terms mentioned in books found in the Google Books repository. So we can see, for example, that the term data mining already by the 2000s was very much a topic of interest. We can see the rise of big data, the term big data, together with the term machine learning, which is closely associated to big data. We can see down below open data and data science, which are not mentioned as much. And finally, linked open data, which is a more specific concept. But still, the trend is of growing interest in data. Now, in the humanities, the view that I mentioned before, that data is a bit of everything, it's not necessarily the most prevalent view, or I would say it is not. It is not the most prevalent view usually. And I reported here this text from an article by Miriam Posner, who said, when you call something data, you imply that it exists in discrete, fungible units. So this is the idea of data as something structured, something, a collection of facts, a collection of statistics. That it is computationally tractable, that it is meaningful, that its meaningful qualities can be enumerated in a finite list, that someone else performing the same operations on the same data will come up with the same results, reproducibility. But this is not how humanists think usually of the material they work with. So very often humanists don't see their materials, their sources that they use as a kind of data. So there is this more narrow definition of data, that it is just what is digital and structured and computable, okay? And this is probably from the point of view of the humanities and also the digital humanities, not a bad way to look at it, because this way allows you to distinguish between the traditional sources that you're using in history from data sources. So when I asked, is everything data? The answer is maybe not, because in the words of Coleman here, everything is data except when it isn't. Every book, pamphlet, manuscript, piano roll, and photograph held in the library cannot be computed against unless it is digital or digitized and then transformed into data. So in this view, data is something that is a result of a process starting from some materials, you get to data. But making those transformations is exceedingly consequential. So the way that data is produced is very important. It is a matter of deciding what counts and what does not count, who is in and who is out. So I found this this kind of way to look at it very interesting. Now, of course, looking again at just the last 20 or 30 years, we see that there has been, again, an explosion in the availability of datasets and projects that enable you and that enable researchers and also historians to study these extensive amounts of data that were not available before. And this is very powerful. And you have all these different projects that you can rely on in your research. So it is now easier to access the data because it is usually available online for everyone to use and see and study. It is easier to analyze the data because we have newer tools and technologies that allow us to do so. It is also easier to manipulate the data and transform it in new ways. Again, through the availability of new tools, such as machine learning. But it is also easier to get lost in the data. And the reason for this is that when you have so much stuff to work with and to work on, it is easy to get overwhelmed. And it is also very difficult to handle the complexity of the data, and especially of big data, which is intended as these massive data sets, often produced in real time. And so in general, yes, we have very, very good advantages today compared to previous times, but we also have these additional difficulties that we are facing. And I reported here this quote by Tim Hitchcock, who says, "We are lost in a world of reference and evidence, which most of us do not understand, and which we do not currently have the critical tools to represent." This is from Confronting the Digital, which is an article You can find the reference below. I suggest reading the full article because it is very illuminating, because it shows a way, also from the point of view of history, the way this the digital turn, and especially the transformation, the technological transformation towards the availability of these large amounts of data have impacted historical research. From what I said before, it is easier to see that engaging with the data is opening up exciting new possibilities for research, because you have a lot more to work on, allowing, for example, complex quantitative analysis that were very difficult to do before when relying on traditional sources of historical evidence. And then we have all these new techniques and ways to study the data, such as machine learning, neural networks, etc. This is a good, and then as I say here, engaging is important and good and useful, but it is important to engage critically, in a critical way. So what I mean here is that you cannot over-rely on these data sets that you find. You have to know what are the limitations, where the data is sourced from, how it has been compiled, how it has been transformed, how it has been published, and who has done it and why. So, because if you don't do this, if you just take for granted what you have and the tools that you have, you face some significant risks. And when data is misused, this can have significant consequences, both in society, when, for example, governments rely on data sets to make some decisions, but also in research, when we don't pay attention to the limitations and to the risks. The growing field of data ethics is looking at this and trying to make sense of it, and trying to find some solutions and some practices that allow us to minimize the risks when handling large amounts of data. So I reported this, again, this definition from this very interesting article, What is Data Ethics, that I also suggest reading. Now, of course, when these ethical principles or even good research principles are not followed, one of the main risks is due to biases in the data. So in the data sets that you can find online, but in any data set, I would say, and even in the data sets that you make yourself, you will find biases. So you will find that these data sets are not do not represent reality in a way that is necessarily correct, or that is necessarily fair or inclusive. for example, because the people who make the datasets and the people, and sometimes the machines who make the datasets, because nowadays that data is not produced mostly by humans, but it is actually produced mostly by machines and computer programs, and very often increasingly artificial intelligence or so-called artificial intelligence tools and systems. And very often you will find biases because, again, adopting a perspective on a certain slice of reality automatically gives you a bias, and society in general is biased itself, and every human being has their own biases. These come in many forms and affect the data at different times. For example, at production, at collection, at modeling, even during use of the data. So we need to be very aware of this. Another important aspect that we need to be aware of is that of data absences. Professor Nayan has written this very, very interesting article encoding the haunting of an object catalog, which describes exactly this concept of data absence or data silence that affects the data sets that we use. We always need to keep in mind that something is missing, or at least it might be missing. And we need to ask ourselves what it is that is missing and why when working with data. I would say this is good to ask ourselves also in general when doing research and relying on any kind of source. So if it is biased or if it has something that is missing and that is not reported in there and that instead should be there. Here again, I reported some data from the Google Books Ngram Viewer to show the rise of data ethics and also the related concept of data justice, which is basically a way to try to bring more attention to social justice issues, mostly into data science, and also trying to make sure that data is used in a fair and just way. But if you look, if you compare this to the term big data, for example, you see that the interest in data ethics and data justice is very much dwarfed by the interest in big data itself. So it is, I believe this is a problem because not enough people are interested in this yet. And compared to the explosive growth of data, we do not have the tools to make sure that data is used in a way that is ethical. So this was just a very quite brief introduction to data in general in computer science and also in data for research purposes. But now I didn't focus too much on that because mostly I wanted to spend time on the second part, which looks at more concrete stuff and practical stuff. And it is about the work that we are doing in the Sloane Lab, which is my current project. What is it? It is a 3-year discovery project that is part of the Towards the National Collection program, which is a British program towards that contains several projects and goes toward the building of a national collection from the different collections of cultural institutions. In particular, our project aims to integrate one collection, but that it has been fragmented between different institutions. And to do so through digital means, opening up this collection for anybody to possibly research and study without having to aggregate the physical collection, okay, but just having a digital layer that allows us to visualize and explore and query the collection altogether. The collection was assembled by Sir Hans Sloane, who was a British physician, naturalist, and collector who collected 70,000 plus objects. These objects are basically anything that you can imagine. He collected a bit of everything. Everything he was interested in. So you can find many, many different kinds of objects. From historical antiquities to objects from different parts of the world that he found just interesting or beautiful, or then we have books, then we have pictures, then we have a lot of different stuff, and a big chunk of the collection is also composed of plants and animals, let's say objects of vegetable or animal origin that Sloane collected due to his interest in nature and also in medicine. So these objects have been scattered among the different institutions. As I said, one of these is a British museum, one is a natural history museum, which has all these plants, etc. And one is a British library, and then there are smaller institutions that are also partners to the project. But I showed here just a couple pictures. This is the Enlightenment Gallery at the British Museum, which hosts some, not all, and I believe not a majority of, just a subset of the objects from the collection. And this is a view of the Sloane Herbarium at the Natural History Museum, where you see all these books, and each of these books contains actually not literary works or anything like that, but they contain plant specimens. So every page, a dried plant. And you can see how many of them there are. So, and then there is also a lot more inside the Natural History Museum that is not that is not shown in this picture. So as I said, the goals of the project are mostly to integrate the collection, but also as we do so, we have a chance to look at the contested nature of museum collections. So this collection was built in the 17th and 18th centuries in a time of colonialism For example, there is some impact from slave trade on the collection. We don't want to pretend that these issues don't exist, as sometimes it has been done in the past. We want to actually look at the issues and the historical events that have affected the collection, and put a spotlight on some of them. This is also very much a participatory project that involves not just these partner institutions, but also communities in several ways, for example, through the organization of several workshops, for example, through community fellowships where people from outside are able to work on the project for a time, bringing the research perspectives and the research questions. And this is because to have a wide understanding of the collection, we cannot just rely on a small team that is interested in some of the aspects, but not necessarily in others from the research perspective. So we need to include people from outside the project. To do this work in the project, we rely on several data sources. And when I say data sources, again, this concept of data is a bit murky, but from my point of view, I consider them all data sources. One of them is historical catalogs that were compiled by Sloane and his collaborators. One of them is contemporary catalogs by the institutions. For example, the Natural History Museum data portal that you can find online, the British Museum Collections catalog that is also available online, in at least partly. And then we rely on existing knowledge bases and authority files that are outside of the project, but that can be useful for the project. And then we also have annotation tools, including both this one that is shown is for manual annotation, but we rely for some tasks that we need to accomplish also on some machine learning. I believe my colleague Jawad has discussed this last time. What we need to do is we need to bring all of this together, make sense of it, and integrate it together, which is not an easy task. So it is not just putting together objects or records describing the objects from different institutions. It is also something which would be an already complex task, but this is even more complex because we also have additional data from outside or produced during the project itself. To let you understand some of the complexities, I have reported here some data about 3 of these sources, which are the historical catalogs, the Natural History Museum data, and the British Museum data. As you can see, this data is provided in different formats. So the historical catalogs have XML data. XML is the extensible markup language. It is a way of building a dataset that allows you to stay very close to a textual source, in this case, the historical catalogs. So the structure of this XML is a bit similar to the structure of the catalog itself. So it follows the structure in a linear way, mostly. The Natural History Museum data is provided to us as JSON. This is JavaScript object notation. This is a format that has been that is today more successful than XML in the sense that it is more widely adopted. It is probably the most common interchange format for data today. The British Museum data is given to us as comma-separated value, which is a tabular format. So already they are incompatible in this sense that they are just fundamentally different in the way that they are structured. Moreover, we can, for data from the Natural History Museum, rely on an existing API, which is an application programming interface, which is a way of interrogating the data and possibly from the dataset that they have construct some different dataset, for example, filtering it. But also an API is something that allows us to always get the more updated, the more up-to-date version of the data. So it is something that you can call this and get the data, basically. And it is very useful, but we only have it for this particular source. We don't have it for the historical catalogs. We don't have it for the Brit, unless we build it ourselves. We don't have it for the British Museum data. Another aspect that is very much different between these sources is identifiers. So identifiers are a way to uniquely recognize a record, or for example, an entity such as a person, a place, etc. When it comes to record, we have identifiers for Natural History Museum data. For the historical catalogs, we don't have identifiers of the individual catalog entries, so I put no here. For the British Museum data, we have identifiers, but they are only for internal use, and we cannot use them. Also, they are not persistent, so this is a bit of an issue. And then for the entity identifiers, we have mostly, we do have them, but not always. Another important difference between these sources is the licensing, so the copyright, where for the historical catalogs, we have multiple copyrights that are reported on the website of the previous project that made them available. For the Natural History Museum data, we have a very open, which is comparable to public domain license, which is Creative Commons 0, while the British Museum has the opposite approach, where they want the data to be used only in a non-commercial way. So again, very different datasets, very different aspects that we need somehow to reconcile if we want to do this, to make this project successful. The way that we are handling this is for all these different data sources, we want to have a single data model. What is a data model? A data model is basically a way to structure the data that allows you to understand what it is that you are describing in the dataset. For example, in a data model, you can define the concept of a person, the concept of a place, the concept of a record, and you can decide that they have to be connected in a certain way. For example, a record can refer to the name of a person. So sometimes you can just compile the data without much regard for modeling it, but it will still reflect your perspective and your worldview. So even if you just construct a table with a list of records, for example, the names that you give to the columns of the table are meaningful and can be considered a very rudimentary form of data model. Of course, the kind of data model that we are relying upon is much more complex than this. But there is always some kind of model involved when you build a dataset. That depends on the person who is doing the work and also on the way they want to use the data. Our model is based on something called the TEI-XML, which is a standard ontology from the cultural heritage domain, and in particular the domain of museum studies. The core entities that we define are the information object, which is from the TEI-XML, which is, for example, the catalog or the record is an information object. So it is an object that carries information. Then we have the physical object, the person, the place, time, events, etc. So many different kinds of entities that are all connected together. And in this map, or sort of graph here, you can see, perhaps it is a bit small, but you can see how everything is connected together, and this is not even the full data model, but just a subset of it. So we had to find how everything relates to everything else, basically. Because if we do this, then we can take the original dataset from the different institutions, we can map them to our model, and then we can automatically translate their representation of the data to a common way where we can integrate everything together. Okay, so this is the goal. Now I mentioned this concept of ontology, and TEI-XML is one ontology. There are many ontologies, but of course, now you might have heard the term ontology because it is used, for example, in philosophy, but in computer science, we intend something a bit different, which is a way to model the data. So it is basically a data model. It has certain other characteristics that make it perhaps a more specific form of data model. But for example, that it has to be shared by a community. that it has to be interoperable, and that it has to be defined in a formal way. But basically, this is at the core of our work in the aggregation of the data. So, and then we also rely on other resources. We rely on vocabularies, we rely on authority files. We need this because we need to connect what we are building with what is already existing outside. And so we don't just want to rely on the data from the museums, which is very useful and very interesting, but we also want to see what else exists outside that we can link to and that we can connect our data to, because this enriches our data, basically. So to do so, we are relying for now on something like VIAF, which is the Virtual International Authority File, and also the Wikidata knowledge base. And then we will probably also use more specialized vocabularies for specific domains, such as biology, because we have a lot of biological objects, such as plants. So this is another kind of resource that we rely upon, and that is itself a source of data, because if you go to VIAF or if you go to Wikidata, you will find that they contain a lot of data. And again, anytime that you rely on it, you have to consider the possible risks and the possible limitations, and how it will affect your project. But, okay, and another aspect that I mentioned before is that of the identifiers. So, as I said, we have this model. So we are modeling the people, the places, the objects, the records, the manuscript that the record is stored on, in the possibly historical events, plant species, I don't know, materials of the objects, so everything that is relevant for our purposes, and that would be useful for our users in the future to study. To do so, we want to give to every entity an identifier, because by doing so, we don't just say the name of the entity, which is ambiguous, okay? We assign an identifier, for example, to Sloane, the collector. In our knowledge base, we give to Hans Sloane this identifier, which we then say it is the same as an identifier from Wikidata. And this is also what allows us to do this kind of linking with external resources. But all of this goes towards the building of what we call a knowledge base. We could call it a database, okay? A database but in with the kinds of technologies that we are using, and in the kind of framework, methodological framework that we are using, it is more common to talk about knowledge base, because we recognize the fact that the data that we are collecting expresses a certain kind of knowledge. And the purpose of the knowledge base is to provide not just the data, but knowledge to people who want to learn about the collection. So this knowledge base will enable analysis and visualizations of the data. It will enable queries. It will enable a lot of stuff that we can build. And you can see here some examples, such as the first image is a graph connecting people together, a map showing some places that are mentioned in the catalogs, a chart showing the people who are mentioned the most, etc. And our goal is to open this knowledge base, open it up for everyone to use once it is finished and complete. Complete is a big word, actually. It will never be fully complete because it will never contain everything that is possible, every piece of knowledge that exists about the collection. But of course, we are trying to include as much knowledge as possible. So in the following, I will look more in detail at some of the catalogs because I want to highlight briefly some interesting issues that come up when working with this kind of historical data. First of all, as I said, these historical catalogs, which were written by Sloane and his collaborators on paper, okay, so these are manuscripts, have been encoded as XML TEI documents in a previous project. So we already have a digital version of the catalogs, and they are already available online at this address below. So you can look at them if you want. They are structured in a very simple way. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, a list of entries that are part of a specific catalog. In this case, it is the catalog of miscellanies. And you can see that there is a bit of everything, because you have the first, maybe it is not very readable, but the first line is knives. The second line is I don't remember, ostrich feathers. The third line is a piece of the keel of a ship rot by the worms, a shoe, the same, an ivory instrument. So a bit of everything, also very strange things sometimes, and curious things to look at. One important aspect is that many of these objects are not preserved, so we don't have them anymore, or we don't know where they are, if they are still existing. So this is important to consider. But the other important aspect is that of uncertainty, and I have reported here a few examples of uncertainties in this kind of data. So this line here says, given to me by Mr. Smith. Of course, if you say Mr. Smith, which is a very, very common surname for British people, it could be a number of different people, and we don't know who this person is, for example. This other entry says a shield made of canes from the East Indies. When you think of the concept of East Indies, this is a geographic term that describes a very wide area of the Earth. And it is very difficult to understand what specifically Sloane meant by referring to East Indies. And of course, it is the same with many place names. where they are very broad terms, such as China, but you don't know specifically where the object comes from. Another example is a belt or bolt. This is reported as bolt in the catalogs, but it has been brought to my attention that it is probably a belt made of unicorn's horn. So unicorn's horn is a material that doesn't exist in reality, but it has been taken as a fact in the catalog that this is made of unicorn's horn. And if you take this claim and just report it uncritically, it would be quite problematic to do. Because then we would be telling people from the 21st century that we believe in unicorns, which yeah, would probably not be the best way to do it. Another kind of uncertainty is this one, for example, but there are many. When an entry just says the same, and you don't have any other information about the object apart from this. So it refers to a previous entry, yes, but it is so vague that it makes things difficult. No, sorry, this is a duplicate slide. And then we have the same thing in the contemporary records. Not the same thing because we don't have the same kind of uncertainty, actually. We have records that are very much more detailed and more specific, and where, let's say, the curators of the museum have done a lot of work to verify the data. And to check that it is correct. So, of course, also Sloane, I believe, was interested in having correct data in the catalogs, but he had a certain worldview and a certain knowledge of the world that is different from the knowledge that we have today. So we have imported some of the data sets from Natural History Museum and a smaller chunk of the records from the British Museum, but there is still a long way to go. And as we go, we find a lot of issues because of the way that the data has been represented and modeled and stored by the institutions or by any source that we are taking the data from. Because the institutions have different purposes, and so they are interested in different aspects of the data, and they represent things in very different ways. So, for example, the Natural History Museum has records that are very focused on very structured. So, for example, it will tell you if it is a plant, it will tell you the species, it will tell you the person who collected it, the place where it comes from, it will tell you maybe the geographic coordinates of the place, which is interesting to study the distribution of the plants. It will tell you when it has been acquired, and it will tell you perhaps techniques of preservation of the plant. The British Museum will tell you more about the history of a specific artifact, because very often many of these objects also have a cultural value that is not just, but this is also true for some of the objects at the Natural History Museum. But the British Museum has done a lot more work to contextualize the object that is now also in a specific culture where it comes from. So population, if we tell you all this kind of useful information about the use of the object, for example. So significant difference is that in some way we have to solve. So we have to find a way to bring it together, bring everything together, and it is not easy to do. So in this final part, I will show two specific objects that I believe are very interesting from the point of view of issues with the data. And these are issues that you can find not just in our project, of course, but in many datasets. So where you have uncertainties, inconsistencies, ambiguities, where you have things that don't match when you try to link two records together, but they describe things that are they describe things in different ways. And I chose this example of a pipe, which is described in the historical catalogs, which you can see on the left, as a large reed pipe from the Great Mogul's country. And then it says the person that it was collected from. And then we have the object at the British Museum, and this is the image of the object that you can see. So it is a quite simple pipe, but the description from the British Museum is quite different because it says smoking pipe. So, for example, by just looking at the left side, okay, the historical data, without knowing anything else about the object, I would have thought that this could be a musical instrument, because when you say reed pipe, often you refer to a musical instrument. But the British Museum says, no, this is actually a smoking pipe. It says that it is made of bamboo. It doesn't say reed, although the terms could refer to the same material, but it says bamboo smoking pipe, and then it says something more about the object. It is clear that the object is this one because it says it has a certain pattern. So there has not been a mix-up in the object, even if the descriptions are different. It is very likely the same object. And then it says a production date, and it says a production place, and the place is India. Now, Sloane says Great Mogul's country. So we have all these differences where the object type is reed pipe, smoking pipe. The material is reed, and in the other record it's bamboo. The provenance is Great Mogul's country, and the other is India. The function or use of the object is unknown, unstated in the historical record, and then smoking pipe in the contemporary record. So it is difficult to make sense of this because, of course, if we have the connection between the two records, we can then bring everything into our knowledge base and try to model everything according to our data model and make sense of everything and connect everything together. But sometimes we don't have these connections between historical records and contemporary records because they have been lost. So we have some objects that are now stored at the British Museum that we don't know exactly where they are described in the records, in the historical records, and the opposite is also true. And this creates a lot of difficulties. But one important aspect here is also language. So when language changes, or when the way to refer to an object, to describe an object, changes significantly over time, this creates problems later when trying to reconstruct the history. Another problem here that I mentioned briefly is related to places and geographical information, because and I chose this example specifically because it refers to a country that is called Great Mogul's Country, that is generally known today as Mughal Empire. And in the first image, you can see that this Mughal Empire occupied the whole of India and beyond in 1700. But then in just a few short decades, it almost disappeared. So this country is a historical country that existed and was very large, and then it didn't exist anymore. So depending on when the record was written, but also depending on the mind of the person who wrote the record and what they were thinking at the time and what their knowledge of the world was, it could refer to any place inside of this very wide region. And we don't know where. We actually have no way of knowing unless we can find some more information about when the record was written exactly, when which collaborator of Sloane wrote the record, and what were they thinking at the time. So it is very hard to do. So when you want to reconstruct the provenance of the object and you want to say it comes from India, but you cannot be sure. It could come from a region that is today Pakistan or Bangladesh or Nepal, and you don't know. And representing this uncertainty in using the technologies of data modeling and of computer science is not easy at all. This is just for fun. I put this because it's a pipe. So the other example that I wanted to make is this drum that is described by Sloane as an Indian drum, and with Indian he meant Native American, not Indian from India. Okay, so a Native American drum that was collected in Virginia, so in a region that is now the United States. On the right side, you can see the same description of the object, but in the British Museum, so it is different. And it says that this object is not, in fact, Native American, it is African. It was made by the Akan people in Ghana. It was, yes, collected in Virginia, but it was misunderstood as a Native American object. And of course, why was this African object in North America? Because of slavery and because of the slave trade. So if you go only by the historical record, you would completely miss this important fact that most likely this object was brought along on a slave ship, although we are not sure about it, but it is a possibility. Again, we see differences in the descriptions, and here it is mostly the provenance, but also the material is described with different terms, even if it is clearly the same material. The collector is the same, Mr. Clerk on one side and Clerk on the other side. But the other big problem with this object is that we don't know who this Mr. Clerk is, because we have at least 6 and possibly more people who are mentioned in the catalogs and sometimes called Clerk or Clark with an E. or reverend clerk, etc. So we are not sure about if these people are the same or not. And it is very difficult to reconstruct because we don't know much about these people. So this is another very important problem that we need somehow to address. And yes, here I just said this. So one way that we are trying to make sense of this, and then a possible solution is to allow for multiple perspectives on the collection. So instead of saying, well, we have the British Museum version of the data or the Natural History Museum version of the data of the description of the object, and this is correct, okay. We say this is an interpretation, and then we have a different interpretation, which is the one that was historically made by Sloane. Of course, generally, very often the contemporary data is more accurate, but there may be some instances when it is not. We don't know, okay? People make mistakes. And in any case, we don't want to erase the interpretation that was given historically to the object. So we don't want to erase the fact that this drum was recognized as a Native American object. It is actually very, very interesting that it was recognized as with the wrong provenance, okay? And it is, as it is also interesting that the institution was able to find the correct provenance, and it is interesting to try to look at it and find out some more about it to understand what is the actual history here. Okay, so however, we face some problems due to the technologies, because even if we are relying on some advanced technologies that, such as semantic web technologies, that are very suitable for this kind of representation, and also very descriptive, so they allow you to basically keep track of the data that you put in, and not it doesn't just get lost among everything. It also allows you to keep track of the provenance, and so it has some advantages, but at the same time it is still excuse me?
Daniele, sorry, we have about 3 minutes left. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
I'm finished. This is actually the next to last slide. So when it comes to yes, I was saying, so there are still some significant limitations in the technologies, and we need to address them. And the way to address them, in my opinion, is not just by having computer scientists try to find new ways, okay, but it is actually by involving the people who will need to use our knowledge bases. And so, for example, in this case, historians, it is very interesting to interface with people who have an interest in the data. Because otherwise, if we leave everything to the computer scientist, these issues will not come up, and very often they don't come up because of some mistaken assumptions and also due to the need of different needs, because basically the need is maybe just to get to the point where you have all the data together, integrated, but maybe it can be done in a way that is totally wrong. So concluding, I wanted to show through this presentation the data can be very useful, a very useful source for the digital historian. And in our case, in the Sloane Lab, for reconstructing the history of a collection. But there are many risks, possible pitfalls, especially when working with very extensive data sets. I didn't have time to mention, for example, the use of data sets in artificial intelligence, which is very problematic, although it is also very useful. Technology needs to evolve to support better ways to represent historical data. And there needs to be a fruitful collaboration between different fields. And I believe that the digital humanities are helping very much to address these issues, which would be overlooked in other fields, but that become very important in the humanities. And so, as we do this research, okay, it will benefit, it will have benefits and impact also outside of the humanities themselves. Thank you. This is the end of the presentation.